Did you know one nuclear war film was so terrifying that the BBC banned it for 20 years, claiming it would drive viewers to take their own lives? Welcome to a journey through cinema's darkest corridor, where mushroom clouds cast shadows over morality and governments censored their own commissioned works. What makes a film about annihilation truly controversial isn't just the mushroom clouds or scorched earth. It's the uncomfortable truths filmmakers dared to whisper when the world was convinced nuclear war could be survived with duct tape and prayer. Number 10. Fail Safe, 1964. Stanley Kubrick threw an absolute fit when Fail-Safe threatened to steal Dr. Strangelove's thunder. But here's the kicker. Fail-Safe is the nightmare Kubrick turned into satire. This black-and-white thriller starring Henry Fonda didn't mock the absurdity of nuclear war. It embraced the horror with surgical precision. Director Sidney Lumet crafted a film so claustrophobic and realistic that Pentagon officials actively sabotaged its production, refusing stock footage and pressuring rental houses to deny the filmmakers access to bomber shots. General Curtis LeMay went ballistic, screaming that the incidents depicted were deliberate lies. But here's what made this truly controversial: the ending. After accidentally bombing Moscow, the American president orders New York City to be nuked as an act of good faith to prevent total annihilation. It's a moral calculus so horrifying that audiences in 1964 walked out in stunned silence. The film suggested that even with the most level-headed president, nuclear catastrophe was inevitable. This directly contradicted the government's official position that nuclear war was manageable and survivable. Screenwriter Walter Bernstein, who had been blacklisted in the 50s, understood Cold War paranoia intimately. He wasn't creating fiction. He was exposing the fatal flaw in mutually assured destruction. Humans design the systems, and humans make mistakes. Fail-Safe bombed at the box office partly because Dr. Strangelove released 9 months earlier, but also because no one wanted to admit their government might sacrifice New York to save the world. The controversy wasn't about special effects or graphic violence. It was about showing Americans that their leaders might have to make Sophie's choice with entire cities. And there was absolutely nothing funny about that reality. Number 9. The Day After, 1983. When 100 million Americans tuned into ABC on November 20th, 1983, they witnessed something unprecedented: primetime apocalypse. The Day After became the most watched television movie in American history, and conservatives absolutely lost their minds. The film showed Lawrence, Kansas getting vaporized, children disintegrating in their classrooms, and survivors succumbing to radiation poisoning in graphic detail. Before it even aired, conservative groups bombarded ABC with complaints, demanding edits and threatening boycotts. The network forced director Nicholas Meyer to tone down the most horrific scenes, fearing viewers couldn't handle the unfiltered truth. What made this deeply controversial was the timing. Ronald Reagan was escalating the arms race while this film screamed that nuclear war was unwinnable. Here's where it gets wild. Reagan himself watched The Day After, privately at Camp David, and wrote in his diary that it was very effective and left him greatly depressed. Some historians credit this film with softening Reagan's stance toward nuclear disarmament negotiations with Mikhail Gorbachev. The movie terrified an entire generation into activism. Schools held assemblies about it. Psychiatrists reported treating children with nuclear anxiety. The film sparked massive public debate about civil defense, nuclear policy, and whether Americans were being lied to about survivability. Critics on the right called it propaganda designed to weaken America's resolve against the Soviets. The left praised it as essential truth-telling. What nobody could deny was its cultural impact. For one night, America stopped and confronted the reality that their nuclear stockpile could turn their country into a graveyard, and all the patriotic rhetoric in the world wouldn't stop the radiation from killing them slowly, painfully, and without mercy. Number 8. Threads, 1984. If The Day After was nightmare fuel, Threads was the stuff that makes you wake up screaming and never sleep again. This BBC production traumatized an entire nation so thoroughly that its 1984 broadcast became known in British broadcasting circles as the night the country didn't sleep. Director Mick Jackson didn't just depict nuclear war. He created a documentary-style descent into hell that followed Sheffield residents through the attack and 13 years into the nuclear winter that followed. The controversy began before filming even finished. The BBC had previously banned the war game in 1965, fearing mass panic and potential harm to viewers. Threads broke through those barriers, but barely. The film showed charred bodies, radiation sickness in grotesque detail, people urinating themselves in terror, summary executions, and the complete collapse of civilization into medieval brutality. But here's what made critics call it the most disturbing film ever made: the ending. A teenage girl born after the bombs, suffering from malnutrition and possible radiation mutations, gives birth in squalor. The baby emerges, and her scream of horror at what she sees is the final shot. We never see the infant. That moment haunts viewers decades later. What made Threads genuinely controversial wasn't gore. It was the film's uncompromising message that nuclear war meant the extinction of human civilization. There would be no heroes, no reconstruction, no hope, just a slow, grinding death for the species stretched across generations. Conservative politicians in Britain accused the filmmakers of unilateral nuclear disarmament propaganda. The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament embraced it as the most honest depiction of atomic warfare ever created. Scientists and nuclear warfare experts praised its accuracy. Unlike American nuclear war films that left room for resilience and recovery, Threads said survival would be worse than instant death. The BBC wouldn't air it again until 2003, nearly 20 years later. Parents warned their children not to watch it. Those who ignored the warnings still carry psychological scars. It wasn't entertainment. It was trauma deliberately inflicted to prevent worse trauma from becoming reality. Number 7. Testament, 1983. Testament arrived the same year as The Day After. But while that film showed bombs dropping, Testament did something far more insidious. It showed you dying from the inside out, slowly, with your family watching. Director Lynn Littman created what critics called the most emotionally devastating nuclear war film ever made, and it accomplished this feat with zero explosions, zero special effects, and zero hope. Jane Alexander delivers a performance so harrowing that Roger Ebert admitted he cried watching it twice. She plays a suburban mother in California whose world ends not with a bang, but with a television broadcast that simply cuts to static. No mushroom cloud, no blast wave, just silence, followed by the slow realization that everyone is going to die. What made Testament deeply controversial was its intimate scale and its refusal to explain anything. You never learn who started the war or why. You never see destroyed cities or military response. You watch a community in the Bay Area slowly succumb to radiation poisoning, and Littman forces you to witness every agonizing detail. Children's hair falls out, skin lesions appear, people waste away. The mother buries her youngest son, then her teenage son, while her daughter grows weaker every day. The film's final scene shows the mother and daughter preparing for death with quiet dignity, and it destroys you. Critics attack Testament for being manipulative, accused Littman of exploiting parental fears for political purposes, and claimed it was propaganda for nuclear disarmament. Conservative commentators said it portrayed Americans as helpless victims rather than strong citizens prepared to rebuild. But here's the truth that made Testament so controversial. It showed that suburban safety was an illusion. All the good schools, PTA meetings, and Little League games meant nothing when radioactive fallout didn't discriminate between the prepared and unprepared. Jane Alexander's performance earned her an Oscar nomination, and the film grossed barely anything at the box office. Nobody wanted to watch an entire family die slowly from radiation. Testament proved that sometimes the most controversial choice is simply telling the truth without special effects or melodrama, just showing that in nuclear war, love doesn't save anyone, prayers go unanswered, and death comes for the innocent first. Number 6, Dr. Strangelove, 1964. Stanley Kubrick took humanity's greatest fear and turned it into the darkest comedy ever made, and the result was so controversial that the Pentagon considered it an act of cultural treason. Dr. Strangelove satirized nuclear war, the military-industrial complex, and Cold War hysteria with such vicious precision that military officials and government hawks wanted it banned entirely. The plot is insane. A rogue Air Force general launches nuclear bombers at the Soviet Union, and the film follows politicians and military brass scrambling to stop Armageddon while demonstrating they're all criminally incompetent. Peter Sellers played 3 roles, including the title character, a former Nazi scientist who can't stop his arm from giving the Hitler salute. The film's most iconic image shows Slim Pickens riding a nuclear bomb like a rodeo cowboy, whooping as he falls toward his target. That image became burned into cultural consciousness as the ultimate symbol of American military absurdity. The Air Force refused to cooperate with production, calling the script ludicrous and offensive. Critics accused Kubrick of giving aid and comfort to America's enemies by depicting U.S. military leadership as bumbling warmongers. The timing couldn't have been worse. The film released barely a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when nuclear anxiety was at peak levels. Some viewers found the satire too sharp, too cruel, too unpatriotic. Others recognized it as essential satire, using dark humor to expose the genuine insanity of nuclear deterrence strategy. What made Dr. Strangelove genuinely controversial was its central thesis. The people controlling nuclear weapons are dangerously incompetent, and the systems designed to prevent accidental war are fundamentally flawed. The film suggested mutually assured destruction wasn't strategic brilliance, but collective madness, and the generals and politicians managing these weapons were either delusional or actively unhinged. Kubrick didn't just mock nuclear war, he mocked the men who convinced themselves they could control it, win it, or survive it. The film ends with multiple nuclear detonations set to Vera Lynn singing "We'll Meet Again," and it's simultaneously hilarious and absolutely horrifying. Conservative critics called it dangerously subversive. Anti-war activists embraced it as truth wrapped in satire. Kubrick didn't care about either camp. He made the film he wanted, and decades later, Dr. Strangelove remains the most biting critique of nuclear weapons policy ever committed to celluloid, proving that sometimes the most controversial weapon against war is brutal, unrelenting laughter at those who wage it. Number 5, The War Game, 1965. The War Game holds a distinction no other film on this list can claim. It was so controversial that the British government and BBC conspired to suppress it for 2 decades, and when the truth finally emerged, it exposed one of the most shameful acts of censorship in British television history. Director Peter Watkins created a docudrama depicting a nuclear attack on Kent, England, using pseudo-documentary style that made it feel horrifyingly real. The film showed firestorms incinerating entire neighborhoods, radiation burn victims dying in agony, police executing civilians to maintain order, and complete societal collapse. The BBC commissioned the film, then immediately panicked when they saw the finished product. They claimed it was too horrifying for broadcasting and would cause mass panic and possible harm to public morale. For decades, the official story was that the BBC made this decision independently. Then, in 2015, declassified Cabinet Office documents revealed the truth. Prime Minister Harold Wilson's government pressured the BBC into banning the film because it contradicted official civil defense policy and exposed government preparations as dangerously inadequate. Lord Normanbrook, the BBC's chairman and former cabinet secretary who helped design Britain's civil defense plans, personally ensured the film never aired. He couldn't let Watkins expose to the British public that government promises about survivable nuclear war were lies. The War Game depicted reality based on extensive research, consulting scientists, and nuclear warfare experts. It showed that the government's Protect and Survive pamphlets were useless propaganda, that civil defense was theater, and that nuclear war meant the end of British civilization. General Curtis LeMay and other military figures went on record calling the film deliberate lies, but scientists praised its accuracy. The controversy exploded when the film won the 1967 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, despite never being broadcast on television. Critics debated whether suppressing information that could save lives was justified to prevent panic. The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament used the ban as proof that governments were hiding the truth about nuclear weapons. When the war game finally aired on BBC in July 1985, 40 years after Hiroshima, it remained as devastating and relevant as ever. The film's greatest controversy wasn't its content, but the government's 20-year cover-up. It proved that when faced with uncomfortable truth, those in power will choose censorship over honesty. And they'll justify it by claiming they are protecting citizens who would be better protected by facing reality. Peter Watkins never forgave the BBC and called it political censorship until his death in 2025. He was absolutely right. Number 4, Miracle Mile, 1988. Miracle Mile is the fever dream nobody saw coming, a film that starts as a quirky romantic comedy and transforms into the most anxiety-inducing nuclear nightmare ever committed to film. Anthony Edwards plays Harry, a musician who misses his date due to a power failure, then answers a ringing payphone at 4 a.m. The voice on the other end is a panicked soldier who dialed the wrong number while trying to warn his father that nuclear war has started and missiles will hit Los Angeles in 70 minutes. What follows is real-time chaos as Harry desperately tries to find his girlfriend Julie and escape the city while Los Angeles descends into violent anarchy. What made Miracle Mile controversial wasn't graphic violence or political messaging. It was the film's commitment to ambiguity. Writer-director Steve DeJarnette never confirms whether the phone call is real until the final moments, leaving viewers trapped in Harry's paranoid uncertainty. Is he saving lives or causing a panic over a prank call? That ambiguity creates genuine terror because it forces you to ask what you would do. The controversy deepened because of the film's ending. After Harry and Julie finally reunite and board a helicopter to escape, nuclear missiles actually hit Los Angeles. The electromagnetic pulse from the detonations causes the helicopter to crash into the La Brea tar pits, and as natural tar fills the cabin, Harry comforts the hysterical Julie by saying their fossils might be discovered someday and placed in a museum. They embrace as they drown in tar, and the film cuts to black with a final nuclear explosion. It's simultaneously romantic and utterly nihilistic. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece of mounting dread. Others dismissed it as exploitative and cynical. The film spent 10 years in development hell because studios couldn't handle the mix of romance and nuclear apocalypse with such a bleak ending. When it finally released in 1989, the Cold War was ending, making it feel like an anachronism. But director DeJarnette said recently it's more relevant now than ever. The controversial truth of Miracle Mile is that it suggests nuclear war could start by accident, by miscommunication, by one wrong phone call, and 68 minutes later, everything ends. No time for goodbyes, no time for reconciliation. Just sudden, permanent annihilation. The film asks a question nobody wants to answer. Given 70 minutes warning before nuclear missiles arrive, what would you do? And more terrifyingly, what if you never knew for sure whether the warning was real until it was too late? Number 3. By Dawn's Early Light, 1990. By Dawn's Early Light arrived in 1990 as the Cold War was ending, and that timing made it paradoxically the most controversial nuclear war film of its era. This HBO production depicted full-scale nuclear war triggered by Soviet dissidents who fire a missile at Donetsk from Turkey, fooling Soviet defense systems into thinking NATO attacked. The film follows multiple storylines. A B-52 bomber crew led by Powers Booth flying into Soviet territory, the president trying to stop escalation, and competing factions aboard command aircraft deciding humanity's fate. What made this film explosive wasn't just the nuclear blasts depicted with then impressive special effects for television. It was the film's clinical procedural approach to showing exactly how nuclear war protocols work. The film meticulously details emergency action messages, strategic air command procedures, DEFCON levels, and the terrifying reality that once certain thresholds are crossed, nuclear launch becomes automatic. Critics in the military praised its technical accuracy while simultaneously hating its implications. The controversy intensified because of the film's political timing. The Berlin Wall had fallen weeks after filming finished. Mikhail Gorbachev and George Bush were negotiating arms reduction treaties. Nuclear war suddenly seemed like a relic of a dying era. Then, By Dawn's Early Light premiered showing that technical failures, rogue actors, and miscommunication could still trigger apocalypse even with improved U.S.-Soviet relations. Conservative commentators accused HBO of anti-American bias because the film's true villain is Colonel Fargo, a hawkish American military advisor who pushes for total nuclear retaliation even after learning the initial Soviet strike was a mistake. He represents the military-industrial complex's death drive, preferring to win a nuclear war rather than accept peace. The film's most controversial sequence involves two American command aircraft, Looking Glass trying to recall bombers, and Nightwatch preparing to launch submarine-based missiles on orders from a hawkish acting president. When Looking Glass realizes Nightwatch will trigger total annihilation, they deliberately ram the other aircraft, sacrificing themselves to prevent the launch. It's an act of mutiny that saves humanity, and military consultants were furious that the film suggested American officers might have to commit treason to prevent nuclear holocaust. The film ends with bomber pilot Cassidy and co-pilot Moreau flying towards sunrise over the Pacific, knowing they'll run out of fuel before reaching land, but relieved the world has a future. It's simultaneously hopeful and tragic, suggesting that even in nuclear war's aftermath, individual sacrifice can matter. By Dawn's Early Light is controversial precisely because it suggests that mutually assured destruction didn't make nuclear war impossible. It just changed how it might start, not through intentional aggression, but through accidents, misunderstandings, and the dangerous automation of nuclear command systems. That message was uncomfortable in 1990 and remains unnervingly relevant today. Number 2, When the Wind Blows, 1986. When the Wind Blows is an animated film that weaponizes innocence to create the most emotionally devastating nuclear war story ever told. Based on Raymond Briggs's graphic novel, the film follows Jim and Hilda Bloggs, a retired British couple living in rural Sussex. When news breaks that nuclear war is imminent, they cheerfully follow government instructions from their Protect and Survive pamphlets, building a fallout shelter from doors and cushions, covering windows with white paint, and believing authorities will rescue them after the attack. They're wrong about everything, and watching them slowly die from radiation poisoning while maintaining their gentle optimism is absolutely unbearable. What made this film staggeringly controversial was its deliberate choice to disguise apocalyptic horror as gentle animation. Jim and Hilda are voiced by legendary British actors John Mills and Peggy Ashcroft, and their performances are so warm and lovable that you want to reach through the screen and save them. But there's no salvation. After the nuclear flash, they emerge from their makeshift shelter into a world destroyed by radiation, though they don't understand what's happening. They try to maintain normalcy, making tea on a camping stove, wondering when the milkman will return, assuming rescue teams are coming. Hilda worries about dirty dishes. Jim reads his government pamphlet religiously. The film doesn't show rotting corpses or mushroom clouds. It shows two elderly people who survived the Blitz, believing this war will end the same way, with Winston Churchill's voice on the radio and eventual victory. But this isn't that war. There is no victory. The radiation kills them slowly. Their hair falls out. Skin lesions appear. They grow weaker. In the film's final, soul-crushing scene, Jim and Hilda climb into paper sacks, as instructed by their government pamphlet, believing rescue is imminent. As they pray together, the camera pulls back and the screen fades to black while melancholic music plays. You know they're dying. They don't. The controversy erupted immediately upon release. Critics called it propaganda for unilateral nuclear disarmament and accused filmmakers of exploiting elderly characters for cheap emotional manipulation. A Labour MP commended it in the House of Commons. Conservative politicians dismissed it as smug, radical yuppie fear-mongering. But the film's true controversy was its devastating indictment of government civil defense policies. The Protect and Survive pamphlets were real, distributed by the British government in the 1980s. They suggested citizens could survive nuclear war by building shelters from household items and following simple instructions. When the Wind Blows exposes these pamphlets as lethal lies that would give false hope to millions while they died from radiation exposure, the film argues that governments telling citizens they can survive nuclear war aren't preparing them. They're condemning them to prolonged suffering. Director Jimmy Murakami, whose relatives died in Hiroshima, crafted the film with a unique mixed media style, hand-drawn characters against photographed miniature sets. This creates an unsettling disconnect between the warm animation and the cold reality of nuclear winter. David Bowie performed the haunting title song, and Roger Waters composed additional music. Every artistic choice serves one purpose: making you fall in love with Jim and Hilda so their death becomes unbearable. When the Wind Blows is controversial because it's a weapon disguised as a children's story, and once you've seen it, you can never forget that nuclear war doesn't just destroy buildings. It murders gentle people who followed their government's instructions and believed help was coming. So there you have it. 10 films that dared show the unthinkable and paid the price with censorship, condemnation, and controversy. From Failsafe's moral calculus to Thread's unflinching apocalypse, these films broke taboos and forced audiences to confront humanity's most dangerous creation. The real question is, which of these films would you watch, knowing what you now know about them? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me which nuclear war film disturbed you most. And here's something to chew on. If these films terrified governments enough to ban them, suppress them, or sabotage their production, what does that say about how much our leaders actually believe nuclear war is survivable? Maybe the most controversial thing these films ever did was tell the truth.